Today we're going to talk about preparing our raw edge applique for our Rainbow Sunshine Mini Quilt. To begin, let's talk about the fusible adhesive you're going to need to do this. One product that I have used quite a bit is Heat and Bond. In full disclosure, I used to work for ThermoWeb, but I was actually using their products before I even started working for them. So this is a product that I love. It's readily available in the United States. If you live in another country, you may find this type of product under a different name. So what you are looking for is an iron-on adhesive, and you want to make sure that whatever brand that you're buying is something that is labeled as sewable. So Heat and Bond comes in a few different weights, I guess you could call it. This one is Ultra Hold, and you cannot sew through here. So if you do not want to sew on your applique, go ahead and use this kind. It would be a great option for you. But I really like the extra look of it, and so you want to make sure that you are finding something that is sewable. Now, this is a frequent look to a package that you might find of Heat and Bond Light. But this is the kind that I actually really prefer, which is the printable sheets. So they are already cut into sheets that fit inside your normal standard printer, and it makes it super easy so you do not have to trace your pattern. If you are going to use a package like this, all you need to do is just trace your pattern onto the paper side of your fusible adhesive. If you're doing this version, you want to make sure that you're printing onto the paper side, so pay attention to which way your printer feeds the paper, and only feed these one at a time. I find that if I try to do two at a time, sometimes they stick to each other, and then the pattern doesn't get fully printed. So I just print one sheet at a time to make sure that it's printed evenly and how I want it. Either way, once you get your patterns traced or printed onto your sheets of fusible adhesive, it's going to look something like this. And then the first thing that you want to do is separate all of your pattern pieces, and you want to make sure that you're leaving a margin around the edges of them to make sure that your adhesive gets all the way from one edge to the other. And it also makes it much easier to cut this out once it's used to the fabric if you've left yourself a margin on there. So cut around them. If you are cutting all of your letters out of the same fabric, then you won't need to do this part. You can just go ahead and trace them all together and then just fuse them all together, but you need to separate them if you're going to be using different fabrics. So the next step is deciding which color of fabric is going to go with which letter. Now, when I have done this for my Rainbow Sunshine Sew Along, you want to pay attention to the fact that you probably have more colors than you actually have letters. So you just want to go through and choose. Now, I try to, like this line, I have a bunch of colors. Some are the same prints, and I tried to make sure that I varied my prints. I do still have a couple of like stars together, you can see here, only because I preferred the tones of these colors. So just pay attention to your scale. I will caution to make sure that you are using as saturated a fabric as you can. These letters are rather skinny, and so if you have a lot of white or a lot of contrast between them, between the colors on your prints, you may not see and hold the shape of your letter just visually as well as you would like. So try to choose fabrics that are as saturated as you can. Tone on tone is fantastic for this, but something that's going to have a great deal of contrast between the letters and your background fabric that you're going to choose to make sure that you see the entirety of the letter instead of losing some of that to the design of the fabric. And it's something that you may not notice until you actually cut out the letter. Because when you're looking at even something like this, where you're looking at a big piece of fabric, it's going to look a lot different than it is once you're cutting it out and you have this narrow line. If that's the case, don't hesitate to retrace whatever letter it is. If you cut it out and you look at it and you're realizing that it's not going to have as much saturation as you thought, it's better to go back now and to redo that letter than it is to not like the letter once your mini quilt is finished. Another piece on that, though, is that sometimes when you're reading, because you know that it says sunshine, it's okay if maybe one of the letters is a little less solid than you might like, but try to make sure that it's not the first letter. at the very least. So like a lot of times you'll find that your yellow, it's hard to read, or sometimes your yellow is really light and so it doesn't stand out as well. And because that's usually, you know, kind of in the middle of the word, it doesn't really impact your visual ability to kind of see it and read it. So try to keep your first and last letters, you know, as saturated as you can. If you just have one letter, you can kind of probably get away with that redoing it. But if there's multiple letters, as you're going through and cutting them out and realizing that because of the skinniness of these letters, this font, you want to make sure that your fabrics are fairly saturated. All right. Now, once you've got your fabrics all arranged, you're going to take your individual letter and you're going to fuse it onto the wrong side of the fabric you've chosen for that letter. You want to make sure that you follow the manufacturer's directions for whatever fusible adhesive product you are using, that you're paying attention to that for the amount of time that you need to fuse this, and also if you need steam or no steam. Typically for fusible adhesive, it's no steam, just a couple of seconds for this first fuse, but please make sure you're reading your package directions to make sure that it adheres really well. Once you have it fused, I like to let it cool, and then you're going to cut it out right along your drawn or traced line. So for this project, for this week, I'm going to recommend that you leave it at this stage. Leave the paper backing on it, but have all of your letters fused and cut out. And then next week, we're going to talk about, in the next video, we'll talk about how to position these on your backing piece, on the background to fit on the bottom, and whether or not you're going to sew it down before you quilt it or after you quilt it, or those different things. So for now, you are going to fuse it to your fabric, cut them out along the traced line, and then set aside your letters, and we'll get ready for the next step of adding our raw edge applique to our Rainbow Sunshine Mini Quilts.